the immediate reaction seemed to be that with Darrell Williams out of the picture, and because Ronald Jones cannot play on passing downs, it is physically impossible. He is incapable of even entering the field if the play is a passing play. That Clyde Edwards Helaire will finally get all of the passing down work, and Ronald Jones will split work on early downs. And I think there's some validity to that. Certainly, I'm not trying to completely balk the idea. I think Clyde Edwards Helaire is an interesting, just the fact that they don't have Darrell Williams to put out there for a bunch of snaps on passing downs means that yes, Clyde Edwards Helaire, the thesis that we've been trying to build up for the last couple of years. You and I were on it last year. We took Clyde Edwards Helaire in at least one spot, I think, because there was this potential for the high value touches that, at his now reduced price, that is still possible that he catches a lot of balls and is good in this offense. But my immediate response is everybody's going to kind of flood to that and get really excited about Clyde Edwards Helaire because he's going to suddenly catch all these passes. But why hasn't he done it the last 2 years? Darrell Williams has been keeping him off the field.
Has he, though, or is it just that he is never really healthy? Backs are not going to play the whole time. The unfortunate thing was that he wasn't able to really grab hold of these high-value touches. The article I wrote before last season talked about how even though Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes haven't used their running backs in the same way that Reid was using LaShawn McCoy, Brian Westbrook, obviously the guy they comped him to when he came out of college, that there was still a dynamic in place where the way the touches were working out, if Edwards Helaire became the back who more or less played when they did use the running back, then he would be fine. The problem that we ran into is that, he just doesn't stay healthy. I mean, you look at the first 4 weeks last season, he plays 63% of the snaps. He gets 9 targets. Darrell Williams gets 5. As you kind of move through the season, he goes through this time period where he's injured, and Williams has some good games in that stretch. But the back who was really a difference maker was not either one of those guys, right? You have Edwards Helaire then getting hurt in week 5, comes back in week 11. He plays over the last month, but probably isn't really healthy. So, again, we don't know what he would look like. He had the 19 point per game average across weeks 3 and 4. Obviously, that's just picking out the couple of good games that he played there before he got hurt. But, I mean, the back who is relevant to these two guys here in terms of Clyde Edwards Helaire and Ronald Jones is Jerick McKinnon. I mean, the Chiefs very obviously targeted Ronald Jones because none of their backups and just none of their players in general at running back were explosive enough to make this offense work. It's part of the thing that they've done with all of their moves this offseason, where they don't want the defenses to be able to play them the way they did last year. And one of the elements of that is that when you have these really soft fronts, your running back has to be able to run through the line and gain yards. It seems like there's this possibility that McKinnon would still be a part of this. But the point that I think that you want to bring up is, what if Ronald Jones is schemed some passing plays where he actually is the target? He can show off that explosiveness. He doesn't need to block. I mean, one of the things that you read about last season with the Buccaneers is that he blew some key pass blocking responsibilities. He essentially gets benched because Tom Brady doesn't want to deal with that. I can understand that from a quarterback perspective, especially as a 40-plus-year-old. I don't necessarily think that Patrick Mahomes would have that same type of response. I don't think that the way the plays are schemed is going to require the same thing from Ronald Jones. And I do think that those guys want the running backs to do things for them in a situation where you could have Jones show off this explosiveness. So if you have some plays early in the season where he goes for 30, 40 yards, if he demonstrates what he did during the time that he was in Tampa Bay, he has this 1,000-yard season, right, where he is a plus inside runner and has a little bit of that Jamal Charles to him where there's not a hole there, but he can make it through for 4 or 5 yards, but then also has that Jamal Charles element where when he does get to the secondary, you have the potential for a long run. I mean, are we saying that they don't want to get that out on the edge? Because the Chiefs are among the league leaders in trying to get their guys in space, but also innovating in a way where they actually do it. Where with a lot of teams, you just hear the coaches kind of talk about that.
Yeah, that last point, I mean, everything you just said is sort of what I was thinking. But as I was hearing, I was obviously being facetious at the beginning of the show with a few different points. I was saying that as well, with saying that Darrell Williams was keeping CH off the field. I guess the crux of this discussion gets down to whether you care about talent at running back, because Shawn, in our discussions, I think we tend to care about it more than a lot of people that are playing fantasy football. I think you do, and I think you've kind of pulled me along with that. There's a lot of people that are just worried about the touches and where the touch is going, and there is that element of, can the player do things with the ball? And then if they can do things, when we talk about the chaos of an NFL season, when we talk about drafting running backs with this anti-fragile mindset, the skill element comes into play a lot, because you were just describing this scenario with Ronald Jones, where if he's able to hit on some big plays early in the year, the way that plays out, the way that Andy Reid does things, and you just hit on this as well, but the way that plays out is Andy Reid starts scheming him more touches. They've done a lot with the screen game over the years. Andy Reid is very aware of what that can bring, even if they think Jones has all these limitations in the passing game, and he clearly does. First of all, it's not just that he can't block. He looks like he's got 2 left feet when he's just running a 5-yard, route to get a dump off pass. I mean, even in the screen game, he looks like he's a baby giraffe learning to walk. It's weird. His legs don't move like they should. It's kind of hard to describe. But Jones is a guy
and he also doesn't get his hands up very well on those short passes. Tom Brady is unreal at the thing that matters most as an NFL quarterback, which is reading the defense and then taking the right option within the scheme that you have, especially if you have multiple options. He's unbelievable, right? He doesn't throw that catchable a pass. And, for years we saw that with Julian Edelman and all those drops. It's like, Julian, you got to catch some of those balls. But, he would also be not to put it all on Tom Brady, but they're not always that catchable, right? The nose is going down. They're at the ground. The short passes are hard. That did not work for Ronald Jones when he's trying to catch either the screen or these dump-off types of passes when Brady was in trouble. Patrick Mahomes throws a more catchable ball. So the fact that Ronald Jones really struggles to get his hands up and they're not soft hands, is that a problem still? Yes. But is it going to be the same kind of problem? I don't know. Maybe we're just dreaming, but I don't think so.
Yeah, hopefully not. But when we get back to this player skill discussion, so what I was kind of joking about with the Darrell Williams comment that he's keeping CH off the field, and you make a good point that CH has not really been healthy, but I guess I'm at the point where I just don't think CEH is special. And you were kind of alluding to this by saying the Chiefs didn't really have a player that could make explosive plays last year. But in my mind, at running back, you're either special or you're not. You're either a game breaker or you're not. You're either just a guy in this part of this mass of running backs that leads to the types of analyses that are very valid, that argue that running backs, don't matter or are interchangeable. There are some backs, though, that obviously challenge that notion and are why that becomes such a heavily discussed topic. You think about a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who we talked about a lot last year when we were talking about the Chiefs. What if the Chiefs had taken Jonathan Taylor over Clyde Edwards Helaire? Shawn still wakes up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. most nights thinking about this. Certainly Jonathan Taylor would have helped a lot of their issues when defenses went into the heavy cover 2 shell last year and we're asking the Chiefs to run. If you have a Jonathan Taylor type talent at running back, that solves a lot of those problems, right? That would have been pretty nice for the Chiefs during the season last year. But again, you get back to why did they bring in Ronald Jones? And I think it's for that reason. And why did they get rid of Tyreek Hill, right? And we talked about this on the show. You talked about how that might make their offense better because now they're going to have more depth of talent in each route, 4 guys that can get open and more things for the defense to have to worry about rather than just scheming for Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. they seem aware of the things that limited them from what the defenses were doing to them. Then you go bring in a guy like Ronald Jones, who for all of his warts, and he has plenty, and especially the fantasy community will be quick to point them all out, he is an explosive runner. He's a good running back. The Darrell Williams thing is just a fun launching off point for this, but to the extent that people are now going to respond and say Ronald Jones can't play on passing down, so CEH is now ticketed for these passing down snaps. Those are the high value touches. That's fantastic. Ronald Jones is going to mix in on early downs. That's sort of the notion that I wanted to challenge when I was kind of talking to you before the show is, and you put it really well, is that if Ronald Jones comes in and he's just a more electric running back and he's making big plays on the ground, running the ball, they'll probably start with that sort of general playing time allotment because Ronald Jones it's known, right, that he's not particularly good in passing downs. Obviously, they know what they got and how Tampa used him is going to influence it. But if they're using him on early down some, and he's looking a lot more explosive than CEH, maybe not even in week 1, but by like week 5, if we're talking about Ronald Jones having, 4.5, 4.8 yards per carry, has a couple long runs, and CEH is still sitting here at 3.9, 4.0. I mean, I think CH has been a reasonably efficient runner actually to this point in his career, but let's just say wherever they're at in terms of, and yards per carry doesn't matter, but it does matter to teams. This is the only point I'm trying to make here. Ronald Jones is doing more with the touches he's getting than CEH is. And CEH, who actually has not been particularly efficient in the passing game, isn't doing much with his passing touches. The very natural thing by about week 5, week 6 will be what we were talking about, what we described, that, okay, well, our better running back is now that's the guy we're going to scheme some screens to and let him play. I mean, there's scenarios where Ronald Jones just starts to play more in all facets. And then when you talk about it from like a projection standpoint, you think about it from a fantasy football standpoint, okay, how do I allocate all the targets and all the receptions in this backfield? Ronald Jones might end up getting more than people are thinking because the immediate thought is like he can't play on passing downs, but it wouldn't be that surprising if he actually winds up catching a decent chunk of balls, the scheme touches like we're talking about, because he just looks like the better back on the early downs and is sort of forcing himself into, we need to get him the ball in space, like you said. And so that's the way that like sort of the chaos of the season and everything could play out. That was my immediate thought was, if everyone's going to say that this doesn't mean anything for Ronald Jones, but it does mean something for CEH, now I have to have an outlandish Ronald Jones opinion again, that he's going to catch like 30 balls, which is probably never going to happen.
Well, again, we talk about the explosiveness and the yards per carry and that type of element. If you want to break it down to the next level, in 2020, Jones was among the league leaders in yards after contact per attempt. Now, some of that is because of breaking some big plays. So if you get a touch and then you go for 50, 60 yards, it's going to kind of manipulate those stats. We're not expecting Ronald Jones to actually be a big time tackle breaker, but it's that combination of breaking some tackles, evading some tackles, and then creating the long runs, which we know that he can do. And it's the perfect fit again for this offense where they're going to be facing soft fronts. It's a good fit, and it's more important here. But kind of back to the fantasy football point, I mean, both of these guys are fantastic picks.
Yeah.
Right? They're both extremely inexpensive, and we have absolutely no idea how it's going to play out. I mean, I think the most likely thing to start is that they try and make Edwards Helaire the bell cow. I think he's going to be the early down back. I think he's going to get plenty of touches around the goal line. I think he's going to be schemed a lot of these receptions that McKinnon was so dynamic with at the end of last season. And they're going to say, we can make him into that back that we've been dreaming of. Now he's experienced. He's still a fairly young guy. All we need him to do is stay healthy and for this offense to function slightly differently than it has the last 2 years. And he can be an absolute star. Right. So from that perspective, anybody who wants to draft Edwards Helaire at his price, I have no problem with that at all.
I don't either.
The flip side of it is that, by a couple weeks into the season, it could be almost all Ronald Jones. And so one of the things that you love about the price is that if this ends up being a committee, they're both going to more or less pay off for you. If this ends up being a situation where one guy gets hurt, the player who is healthy is going to pay off for you. If it becomes a situation where one guy emerges, that guy is going to pay off for you. And, if you're playing any volume of leagues whatsoever, then you can get a decent amount of both. And in at least, half of your leagues, or maybe you're not getting a 100% exposure to a Chiefs back every league, but I mean, it's going to pay off. right? And it's also not even going to hurt you that much in the leagues where it doesn't pay off. And so I think that you want to have exposure to those two guys. Another situation that has a ton of differences in the specifics, but has some similarities that are very important from a very general perspective would be the Buffalo Bills, where just like last season, where we said take Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, and it worked out on those Singletary teams, especially if you were still alive late in the season. We're right back in that situation again now where Singletary and Cook are both just so cheap. I mean, we're talking about the two best offenses in football, and you can draft their running backs for peanuts, and that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, it's great. And I completely agree with the idea to take both. I'm kind of doing the thing where I'm getting like 2 steps ahead of myself, where I'm anticipating, some of the response, meaning that we're going to see CH's price get driven up a little bit here because people are going to respond to Darrell Williams being gone now as a positive for CEH, and then suddenly he's going to start to creep up. And most of my commentary is if that starts to happen and we get like a 3, 4, 5 round gap in ADP, then Ronald Jones is going to be a really nice pick relative to CEH. Probably still both be fine. I mean, I'm with you. Like I don't think it's wrong to be excited about CEH either. I think they're both great options. The flip side of this huge free agent move, Darrell Williams to the Cardinals, is that it's not probably great news for our boy Eno Benjamin.
Is there anything, though, that really could be negative news for Eno Benjamin? All you have to do is go out there and show you're the best of a pretty underwhelming group of players. But one of the things that we have here for the Cardinals is they have to have a variety of guys because James Conner is not a back who has the health background that you would expect him to be able to hold up under the workload that they're going to be tempted to give him, because during the time period where he does hold up, it's very exciting to see him play that way. And so then you have to have some backups. And this is very good planning from a football perspective, right? The reality look at this is that we want to have a number of backs who could potentially do what we need to see. And yeah, it's not good for Eno because they have had a couple of years to watch him. So we don't love the fact that even with that being the case, that they go out and add these other players. But I mean, Williams is your prototypical 3rd or 4th string running back, and he's higher profile because he got some favorable situations with Kansas City, who's an electric offense and an offense that is facing soft boxes. But you go and you look at his stats. I mean, this is a guy who, with the Kansas City Chiefs, averaged less than 4 yards per carry. He averaged 1.7 yards after contact per attempt. He has a 7% evasion rate. But this is a guy who's a very borderline NFL player, right? And I don't say that in a nasty or derogatory way, because if you're someone who is not expected to play in the NFL and you fight your way through and you're a borderline talent and you make it and you create a career for yourself, I mean, that's an underdog success story. That's not something to be, turning up your nose at or saying, oh, this guy is terrible. But it is the case where he's not someone who necessarily changes a backfield purely from his own talent.
Definitely. It's just a head coach comfortability thing, I think, with him. It is kind of hilarious because he's not particularly good, but dropping him into any situation, if there's an injury to James Conner, there's going to be this thing that's, well, Darrell Williams is that veteran. He's the mentor again. He's the mentor again in a new offense. I will say,
do you have a pick? I mean, it seems like you're heading towards a pick between Williams and Ingram and Eno Benjamin here.
Well, one thing I wanted to say about Eno that I think is getting missed, and I made this point last year, and I'm going to make it again, and it's not a good point, but I'm going to still keep making it, is he was a 7th round pick. He hasn't got a lot of work, but he's still on the team after 2 years. And I don't think that's nothing when you're a 7th round running back. That's sort of a pretty clear flyer pick. A lot of those types of guys are not with the same team a couple of years later. Eno, has stuck around enough to the extent that I'm not saying the team likes him, but we're seeing it. Like I think the fans community is seeing it as a very, very much a negative that they haven't really used him a lot yet. Like they don't like him. And I just want to kind of reiterate, like this dude was drafted in the 7th round, and just the fact that he's still on the roster is sort of evidence that they do like him. There are a lot of 7th round picks that get cut before their rookie season. They don't even make the initial roster. I saw that as an argument in favor of Keontae Ingram, who was a 6th round pick this year. And I think my argument would be that Ingram is potentially more likely to be cut than Eno, or I mean, just essentially because a 6th round pick can show up out of shape or can show up and not be what they think they were drafting. They haven't seen him yet in their practices necessarily. They're obviously doing rookie camps now. I haven't been reading a whole lot about that, but Eno is a guy who has been around for a couple of years and stuck because he's doing something behind the scenes, right? And so, I mean, this is a very ridiculous point to be making, but my point is essentially that we're viewing it as this big negative that Eno hasn't got his opportunity yet, but the fact that he's still on their roster is actually sort of something.
It definitely is. And if you go into this offseason and you're Eno Benjamin, and the additions that the Arizona Cardinals make at your position are a 6th round pick in Darrell Williams, I mean, is it possible to get any better than that? I mean, it's just an NFL team. You're not going to go empty at the running back position. There were going to be names to fill those slots, right? I mean, you could be getting hit with Sony Michel right here, who had a good season last year and is a former 1st round pick, a big guy. Michel, not a star either by any stretch of the imagination, but probably someone who, and not that people are saying this is not the case, but just, looking at how these backfields are being affected by recent signees. If you're Chase Edmonds or Raheem Mostert, certainly Myles Gaskin, you don't really want Michel being thrown in there. Williams probably doesn't change the dynamic for Ingram, for example, who, being mentioned as this year's possible Chase Edmonds after, as you mentioned, these rookie camps.
Yeah, we don't expect that to happen. I mean, maybe it will. It could happen, I guess. I don't know. But the addition of Darrell Williams probably doesn't speak particularly positively about that. It doesn't speak positively about Eno either. You were saying I might make a pick. I mean, the really lazy thing is to not want to draft any of them. The next level thing would be, again, who do you think is the best player? What do you get if it pays off, if your bet pays off? I mean, what do you get if Darrell Williams winds up being the guy? He had some good games for KC last year. If James Conner gets hurt and Darrell Williams does consolidate a lot of the backfield, I mean, you get like an RB2, maybe, if you're lucky. I mean, you get sort of what the offense gives you. I think that's sort of the case with Keontae Ingram as well. With Eno, there's at least this faint sliver of hope in his profile that you get more than that. And so at least that's the way I look at it. So that's why I would, if I had to pick, would still be on Eno, because it would be if Connor's out of the picture, who's the guy that actually has the most upside? And I think it has to be Eno.
I think that he's likely to lead a committee if Connor gets hurt. It seems like the way that they're building this out probably makes it difficult for him to be as fantasy relevant as he would need. From Williams' perspective, this is absolutely perfect because there aren't going to be a lot of spots where you have an injury-prone starter and no established back behind in an explosive offense. So you have to love that for him. I think that even though it's a late-round pick, I'm almost tempted to take the rookie just because in some of these cases where we know the least about what's likely to happen, it's actually that uncertainty that can play a little bit more in our favor. Williams and Benjamin have been in the NFL. The chances that they explode for, a running back 5 season, for example, probably not great. But we have seen players emerge later. So all 3 of these guys, you like the uncertainty, but all 3 of them, the floor is so low that when you're talking about 18 and 20 roster spot leagues, which is mostly what's being drafted right now,
They're all drafted.
like you said, I mean, it's tricky to draft any of them.